We are families, we are caregivers, we are parents to children with disabilities and medical complexities. We are rarely familiar. We get together to learn, to relate, and to laugh a lot while we share each other's unique family experiences of raising the rarest of the rare. Our goal is to unite, inspire, educate, and empower people living a rarely familiar life. And we're so glad you're here.
Hi, welcome to Rarely Familiar. This is Tram, and here with my friends Haley and Jen, where we dig into the realities of raising the rarest of the rare. Today, we are going to get familiar with Dannell Shu and dig into her experience with palliative care and hospice care. But before we do that, let's check in. What's going on with everybody today? Jen, Haley, what's going on?
Hi. I have news. I have little Julian is graduating from 8th grade tomorrow. And so it's the last day of school, which is mixed, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting, but also, but yeah, he's going to walk across the stage and hopefully all goes well. You never know with him, but it's the whole 8th grade class. So that's exciting. And then on Saturday, so this is a big week for him. He has his first track meet with the Special Olympics.
Oh,
yeah. So we're hosting in 2026.
Yep.
So my original idea was, because my stepfather was in the Olympics in 1968. And so I was raised by a man who was an Olympian, and running was part of our family. So therefore, I've passed it on to my kids. And although it looks really different with Julian, obviously, I had this fantasy of Julian making it into the 2026 Special Olympics. But the reality is that's probably not going to happen because he can't stay in the lane. And he gets distracted and he's like, what else is there to do? Oh, I have to run from here to there.
We'll all be there cheering on the other athletes. I think
cheering
we're
on.
excited for that. I think
It'll
it's
be
a very big event.
It's
Julian. That's awesome
fun.
that he's doing it. Love it.
He loves it, and then he gets tired, and then he doesn't love it. I think this will be different because it's in the morning, and he's not a night person. For practice every Sunday night at 6 p.m., it's pretty difficult. Right. I'm all done. Yeah. He does one lap and I'm like, wait, we just drove a half hour to get here. No, you got to run another lap.
Maybe running isn't his thing. Maybe you got to find another sport, right?
I know, but there's not too many other options.
Now, does someone run with him in the lanes, or is it each runner by themselves in the lane?
Not when you're visually intact. If you're visually impaired, you can have but no. And I was like, gosh, it would be so much easier if Makai, my older son, could run with him and keep him like focused. But it's not allowed. Unfortunately, no. But he does like to run. We go on trail runs as a family, run walks. And so I really do think he likes to run. It's just this feels maybe too confined to him. He's more, I want to be free and do circles and spins and somersaults. And boring, maybe, running in the lane. I don't know. Anyway, so that's my week. What about you two? Anything fun this week happening or hard or
I think there's just a lot. There's a lot going on. I like talking about the Special Olympics because it takes me out of my. It's just chaos. It's summer chaos right now.
It really is.
So I want to think ahead to 2026 when we have adult-sized changing tables everywhere a year from now.
It's Father's Day weekend, so that's the other thing.
It is.
But of course, Sean was like, "I'm going to go golfing on Sunday," and I go, "Oh, okay."
I know. I have some girlfriends coming into town. These are my friends from college, and we're going paddling through the inner city lakes. Like,
mini haha.
We'll put in on Bidemakuska, depending on who's using their own canoes. But I'll probably rent one right there. So Bidemakuska through the canal to Isles, then through the canal to Cedar, and then back. And we're gonna go have dinner at Barbette.
There's another lake from Cedar through another channel to Brownie Lake.
Yeah. Oh,
so it's on the very northwestern side, and it's hidden. It's cool if you can get through there. It's neat. So
yeah, I think living in Minnesota, if you haven't, it's especially in the city, if you have not paddled those 3 lakes, you are seriously missing out.
Yes, it's gorgeous. So that's ironic that you're a paddler, because that's the fun fact about our guest who's joining us. I'd like to introduce Dannell. Dannell is a mother of 2. She's a palliative family care advocate and a clinician educator. How she came into my life is that her son Levi was diagnosed being deafblind, and so is Sadie, and so we met each other through a mutual mother. Welcome, Dannell. How are you?
Glad to be here, and I agree. Brownie Lake is the lake to find. Absolutely,
yes.
Yes.
You know it.
Yes. The fun fact with Dannell is that she grew up canoeing and paddling. And so now she's been able to share that love with both of her kids. Leo actually really doing canoeing and then also doing some floating with Levi in the canoe.
What I'm curious to know, you talk about paddling, and if you aren't doing that in Minnesota, you're not a true Minnesotan, right?
Right.
But we heard you say that it looked different with each of your kids. Tell me a little about that.
With my second born son, who doesn't have any of the rare disease or neurological challenges, it looked like taking classes together with the Loppet Foundation, and it was actually racing canoeing.
Wow.
We met at Cedar, and then one of the places we would paddle to is through that little mystery tunnel to Brownie Lake. So it looked like that. And with Levi, it was just floating in boats, but he also loved being in the water. He needed a lot of support. So having a float that went around the neck to support him and then his head, and then also support with hands-on, or sometimes he could float on his own. So water and floating looked really different with the two boys. And yeah,
I think
greatly loved.
every one of our kids love the water. There's just something magical about the water and freeing about the water.
Therapeutic.
It is.
So therapeutic. That's beautiful.
So Dannell, we're excited to have you here. And we ask this question to everybody who joins us on the podcast. And I might have already given it away already in the intro, but what is your tie into the disability community? And if you could also talk about Levi too.
Levi is my tie-in to the disability community. He is my first son, my first child. He was born full term and unexpectedly with severe brain damage. That is in the form of the diagnosis of severe HIE, hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. And that landed us in the NICU, the deep world of medical complexities, because the severe brain damage was the first of many diagnoses that came down the pike, starting with our 3 weeks in the NICU. And then as we started seeing specialists, further and further, the list grew and grew.
Do they know what caused the severe brain damage in utero, right?
They do not know. And there's a lot of really good research that's being done now, but there's a lot of unknown. And HIE has a range of expressions. It can be mild, moderate to severe, and therefore a range of what kids experience and what their life looks and feels.
We have Dannell in is that she has that real lived experience of having worked with both teams of palliative care and hospice, because her son Levi did die at 7 years, and it's 7 years that he's been gone as well.
Correct.
Yeah. If you could help educate us, what are palliative care? What is hospice care?
Yes. So palliative care is a large umbrella that includes palliative care itself. It includes hospice care inside that umbrella. And then at the far end includes bereavement care. So the palliative care side, which is a specialized medical care that helps people, both adults and children, who have serious illness, life-limiting conditions, life-impacting conditions, to get a kind of help that is from a specialized team that focuses on relief of symptom burden, stress from having a serious illness or medical complexities, and really has a goal of improving the quality of life for the child and the family. So usually when you see a neurologist or a GI specialist, they're systems focused. And palliative care is a whole person system, but also that child inside of the family. And so then it looks at what does quality of life look like for this child, and helping the family navigate that, helping the family navigate what are their hopes, their dreams, their fears, their wishes, their desires. When we know that our child's life is being impacted by a diagnosis of whatever nature, and that diagnosis may also impact the length of their life, when we know that time is shortened or impacted, what does quality of life look like? Because it's not just the automatic that we might have with a child that isn't given those diagnoses or doesn't have them. So what does that look like? How do you figure that out? So that's one of the ways that palliative care shows up. And palliative care is a team. It's a team of clinicians. So that team can include physicians, nurses, social workers, chaplains, music therapists, child life specialists, pharmacists, depending on where the team is based, what the resources are of that team. But by design, palliative care is a team-based support for a family and a child.
And so it's that big, like you said, it's the big umbrella term that encompasses those other things. Like you said, there were 3 things. So you said palliative is the umbrella, and there's hospice.
Hospices, and then there's bereavement.
Team approach question really
Yeah.
quick before we move on. So if we have this team approach, is there a care coordinator who brings everyone together? Because I think of the Mayo Clinic system has that kind of approach where you have somebody from neurology and genetics, and somebody helps keep the communication open between everybody. Does that exist with a palliative care approach?
Yes, in many
It does.
approaches,
Okay.
it is the nurse as your main point person who
Okay.
also serves as like a coordinator or a case manager. Something unique about palliative care, depending on the setting, is that these teams have regular team meetings. So that when you have a team that's big enough to have more than one physician, more than one nurse, more than one social worker, these teams get together as a whole team, and they are continually updating each other on what's going on with this child, what's going on with this family. So that when the social worker comes to offer support, or the chaplain, or the physician, whoever it might be, even the music therapist, they're aware of the whole child. They're aware of like what's going on. Is this child dealing with a pneumonia? Is this child dealing with an increase in seizures? Is this child dealing with loneliness? What's going on? And so that everyone's informed, and then they're also communicating with each other from a music therapist perspective. Here's what I experienced is going on with this family. So it's a multidisciplinary dialogue also, as well as what's going on with the mom, right? Like mom's struggling with these new meds. Like they're hard for mom either to grapple with. I don't really want to give these meds to my kid, or like hard to administer. I'm having trouble keeping them up on the schedule. I'm tripping over this. Another piece that is also beautiful is there's coordination to the other specialists. So this team doesn't work in isolation. They are continually communicating out to the other specialists what's going on, and also trying to gather that information in. Like when we would have a significant meeting with the palliative care team, that team had gone through the notes as best as they could. So many times we walk into a clinic and here we start all over again. Probably spend the first half hour, it feels
Which
like,
isn't triggering at all.
Dannell, though, help me understand, how do you bring in the palliative care? I am spread out through multiple hospitals. So I go Children's, Minneapolis. I go to Gillette for some things. So is it like inpatient is when you brought in palliative? Walk me through. Is it at every clinical meeting that you have, or how did you get in touch with them, or when do they come into the picture?
Care can be available in hospital. They can be available in clinic, and they can be available in community. So coming into your home. Whether that's all available out of every hospital system is not always true, right? Some hospital systems have it in the hospital. Some have it in the clinic. Some do or don't have community-based care. And this is where I'm talking about palliative care as a specialty team.
Okay.
When I'm in the hospital, what that looks like is I have all those specialists that I need in the PICU, and we're there for whatever reason we're there for. And then that palliative care team comes in as a separate team and a coordinated team to help us navigate, how do we do this well? For example, when Levi was in the PICU, he'd moved over to a G tube. He was having a lot of complications with dealing with that. Not the tube itself, but now feeding has changed. And it's really like, how does his GI system deal with feeding? But we're off of the scope of the GI surgeon because the tube went in, the tube is functioning. We're out of that scope. And yet he's in the PICU, he's intubated. We're dealing with some like major crisis questions. Oh my goodness, what do we do and how do we do this? And so that's where palliative care comes in and helps us get regrounded into what are our goals of care? What does it mean from our values and the lens that we have created for Levi's life as a quality of life. What does that look like here in the hospital? And then how do the decisions that we make in the hospital impact what life looks like at home? And so then they come in as a separate team, and yet because they're integrated into that hospital system, they're then relaying all that conversation back to the PICU team. They're coordinating with some of that specialty knowledge that the PICU team has to make sure, do we really understand what these choices are or what the challenges are? And then how do we translate our values, including our hopes and our fears, into medical decisions for Levi and for our family?
Okay. Got it.
So I have a kind of a question that seems maybe obvious to you, but from the outside thinking, is there a point? It sounds like it gets to be a very serious when you say that the quality of life has been impacted. I think at what level does this come in? It's a high level. It's a serious level, because I think all of our 3 kids, their quality of life is impacted by their condition. At what point it gets to be more life-threatening, I understand as well. But does somebody come to you and say, hey, this is an option, we can help you in this way? Because I just think we can get lost in the system. So I'm just
Great
curious, like
question.
how this gets initiated, and then is it the most severe extreme kind of place that your child's at where this then kicks in? It
Great
sounds like.
question. So for us, we got a palliative care consult in the NICU. It was
Okay.
at week 2. It was questioned, was Levi going to live? His brain damage has affected everything. We think also the brain stem. So can he suck, swallow, gag, choke, cough? Can he clear his airway? And we, as I expressed, like, we really want to go home with him. We don't know what that looks like, but we know that he can't stay hooked up to everything in the NICU forever. So what does it mean to work through the stages of what is needed in the NICU setting? And can we go home with him? And what would that look like? So in that setting, we got a palliative care consult. If he was older, like we had friends who their kids were 5, 7, 9, 12, 13, whatever those ages are. And they had learned from us that palliative care is a thing. And they're like, how do I get that? Like, how do I start having these conversations? And you can go into your provider and say, I want to talk to a palliative care team. How do I do this? How can you help me get a referral and get these conversations going? Because the conversations can be initiated at any time, given the diagnosis collection of your child. You don't have to wait for that serious, high-level decision-making, right? Oh my goodness, now what? It's actually really helpful in that calmer space.
Yeah.
Be able to say, I need some help. I'm going to have to make hard decisions. I'm going to have these moments when none of the decisions are easy. I'm going to have to face some really difficult things. And I'd like to do some of my personal homework, do some homework with Levi. When we had that first set of conversations, that what are our hopes, fears, wishes? How do we articulate our values and turn them into a medical care plan? That plan became the lens that we then made every decision through. So like when a spine surgeon is, he needs spine surgery and we can do it and we can do it now. And I'm like, we just came out of 6 rounds of pneumonia. We're still trying to make sure breathing is stabilized. And I understand we can, but I'm not totally sure this is the right time to do this. That's when that palliative care plan in a non-emergency came into play. Like, how are we going to handle this surgeon's, hey, let's do it. Let's get it on the books. Let's schedule it. Like, how do we actually make that decision?
Bring us back to what are our goals and dreams and where we're at, the baseline. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like I've often been inpatient and they ask, do you have palliative care? And I'm like, no. But I don't know that I've really dug deep, because I always associated palliative care to hospice. And I was like, no, he's got, as far as I understand, he has a full life expectancy. Do what you need to do for this kid. And so I've always said no, but I'm hearing that like maybe that it doesn't have anything to do with that necessarily.
It's about living your best life now.
Yeah.
And you can still have the values and the perspective of we go all in. Give me like everything Western medicine's got and then some. But then that's the lens that we make our decisions through.
Mm-hmm.
You get to figure that out for yourself and for your family. And then when you're faced with, okay, here are the options, then you can know, okay, I'm already lean this way, or our lens, our values are like, yeah, we're going to go for it. So, yeah.
Dannell, sorry, and maybe this is a separate topic, but I think it plays into it, is I also hear an underlying the paperwork of a healthcare directive. So I think this is playing into that palliative care. And I know a lot of people don't want to talk about a healthcare directive where it's almost like, because I think in my mind, I automatically go, do I want them intubated? No, that's when I cut it off. But I think you're saying something that is making me believe that it ties in is you're thinking about you want every Western medicine there is to save your child, you're full in. And then the quality of life doesn't always come into discussion when I think of filling out that paperwork for the healthcare directive. So can you help us understand that piece within palliative care?
Yes. So the healthcare directive is the documentation that's needed in order for the medical teams to follow your lead, to follow the decisions that you want to make or not make or be asked about. And so when that document is filled out, it gives your medical teams a framework to understand how your values translate into medical decisions. So intubation is a great example. We were the same way with Levi. We knew going into that conversation, one of the things we didn't want is just an intubation for intubation's sake. We knew that if he had surgery, he'd have to be intubated to actually do the surgery.
Right.
But we didn't want a breathing emergency to turn into intubation automatically. So that was already known for us. That was an edge for us. Like we don't want to cross over that edge. And so what are those, again, values that you have? That's included in that. And then how do you make those decisions? So like in our case, we said with Levi, he had very fragile lungs. So then the palliative care team explained to us that given his fragile lungs, given his neurological condition, he would likely have a breathing event as a part of his dying experience. Now that might mean an emergency and then his heart stops and everything stops. It might mean something where he's restricted in his breathing and he's struggling. It might mean a lot of things. So knowing that we didn't want to get to an intubation, then they helped us like back it up. Like how does a child get to an intubation with a breathing event? Again, emergency, a serious emergency or growing emergency, right? How does a kid like Levi end up intubated? What are the medical steps that happen before that? So that then we could see, okay, that's the pathway to intubation. What parts of those pathway do we want to take or not take? And do we understand the steps along the way?
Got it.
And
That's so
how
helpful.
does that fit or not fit within our values for Levi and this quality, beautiful life that we want to help him embody? And I completely understand the document itself is super scary. It's like check boxes, right?
Yeah.
I'm just supposed to check some boxes and then sign that this is okay. What?
And yet, I think that's the scary part is you're doing it all by yourself, where I think this palliative care team can help you through that. And I think that's an amazing resource that I didn't understand as a parent, right? And so everybody's given a healthcare directive, and I'm getting hit by that question on two fronts, not only for my child, but my mother lives with us, so I would be my mother's caretaker as well. So I think that is an awesome aspect to see. Got it. Thank you. All right. Now, I think we've got a good grasp on palliative at a high level. Walk us through what hospice looked like and when and how you utilized that palliative care within the hospice arena.
Hospice care, as I mentioned, is a component within palliative care. The two often get interchanged and confused, like I go on to palliative right before I go on to hospice, or if I say yes to palliative, then I'm saying yes to hospice. They're actually two different sets of services, and they're two different sets of coding in the insurance payment worlds, right? You may have the same team that does palliative and hospice because they're very interrelated, and especially in pediatrics, people that are palliative care specialists are also pediatric hospice specialists. In terms of credentialing and all that, it's considered a palliative care specialist. So your team in palliative care can flow with you over to hospice. It is a separate set of services. You have to agree to it separately. The beautiful thing, due to current federal legislation, is there's something called concurrent care. Concurrent care is only available to children and adults who are veterans. Concurrent care allows us as parents to continue what is considered life-sustaining support, medically, therapeutically, even the equipment and the gear that our kids have, continue life-sustaining supports, and add in hospice care. We don't have to make a decision. We can say, yes, I recognize my child needs this, my family needs this care, and prognosis with children is really hard to do, right? How do we actually know if in the next 6 to 12 months my child's going to die?
So this
I
is
don't
a
know.
different component than for adult hospice.
Yes. So
Because
in
when we think
adult,
of adult hospice, we think this is the end, maybe 6 weeks max, 2 weeks, whatever. So I think that's where that piece comes in. Is, oh, how is it? So it is different in terms of the child, then they are still meeting their needs, and there isn't necessarily like a endpoint that you're aware of. How would you explain? Yeah.
for adults, the window is 6 months or less. A physician has to say, yes, based on the trajectory of the disease or the diagnosis, that it's likely that this person would die within 6 months in the adult world specifically.
Okay.
And in that world, unless you're a veteran, you do have to say, I'm going to stop curative, life-sustaining treatments and move over to hospice. You do have to make that decision. So any of us who've had parents or other family members who've gone on to hospice, like that cutoff happen, which then really means like all those people also go away. If you have a great PT that comes into the home for your child or for your mom, and then the PT can't come anymore because your mom's on hospice. With our child, thanks to concurrent care, the PT can keep coming into your home. Your child can still go to water therapy. Your child can still receive their nutritional benefits and all those kinds of
As
things.
long as they're able to, you continue. right?
Exactly. That's where you get that hospice support around how do I navigate feedings? How do I navigate what my child's body is telling us in relation to their diagnoses and what's going on.
So is
And
the
so then-
concurrent care status, has that been around a while, or is that a new?
Pediatrics, that was brought in through the Affordable Care Act, specifically for
Okay.
pediatrics. Adult veterans have had it much longer. And It's a
Okay.
different set of legislation for them. But it was through the Affordable Care Act that allowed specifically for our children to have that concurrent care access.
And that's national, not state.
That is national. It is
Okay.
administered at the state level. In some areas, it's administered at the county level. It is not equitably administered.
Wow.
I have a related but separate question. I'm often inpatient and walking down the hall, and I see on some people's doors a DNR. And for a long time, I didn't even know what that acronym was for. It just as a sticker that's on the door that says DNR. And then I learned that means do not resuscitate. Is that the decision that those decisions that you start to make when you're in palliative care?
Those are decisions you look at when you're in palliative care.
Okay.
And that's where that advanced care directive will be the expression through documentation of what is that decision now. If you want to make that decision or not want to make that decision. Again, if your child is inpatient, a code is called or needed, right? What have you decided in advance as a parent that you do or don't want to have happen?
What is their
With your
quality of
child.
life? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And parents feel very differently about that and very strongly about that. And go for it. This is your child.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. Feel strongly. But having that documentation means that your wishes will be honored. If you don't have that documentation, the automatic default is they have to call the code. They have to do what they have to do.
Mhm.
And for your child, whether that is helpful or beneficial or fits within that expression of quality of life and the pathway you want for them. And that's why I encourage parents to find out, like, what does a code mean? Like when a code blue is called, what does that mean?
Mhm.
What does that look like for my child right now, right? And then as they hit different milestones, and it might be that you're in the hospital for a very serious illness that's added on to what's happening already with your child and their diagnosis. And that what a code might look like in that context in terms of impact to the child's body could be very different when they're not facing that. In terms of hospice, palliative care focuses on the living life. Hospice focuses on, again, a team-based approach, an interdisciplinary team supporting the child and the family regarding the dying process. So that is, again, bringing those hopes, wishes, fears, and values to the dying process and the support of the family in that. It goes far beyond, are you want to have cremation or burial? Like it's how does your child live well all the way through their life? For Levi, he had 4 days of what we describe as active dying. We knew he was dying. His body was shutting down. He was actively dying. And for him, it was a 4-day process. And hospice helped us really understand and make clear decisions about how can we live life with him to the fullest? What does that look like in balance with what's actually happening with his body all the way through what ended up being 4 days? Could have been 4 hours.
That's a long period of time. So does the bereavement piece then come in immediately after his death and they provide those services for you?
Yes. So part of
Okay.
hospice, when you sign up for hospice, you automatically get with that a year of bereavement care that's built in. And every hospital clinic system has a little different puzzle that they put together for that. But when you're in hospice, then you have that automatic rollover to bereavement care. You often change to a different individual or group for that care because that is specialized care as well. You might have some crossover depending on the team, but many times you're then given a gentle handoff to that bereavement coordinator or bereavement team.
And what does that look like? Do they have individual counseling for you?
It ranges wildly, honestly.
Okay.
Some systems, they have a rhythm of sending out cards at certain times. Often there's a fair amount of phone call or text or email check-ins within the first weeks to months. Many hospitals have a remote memorial service that they do so that you're invited to that where you gather with other families and get a chance in community to honor and remember your child. And those are amazing and beautiful services. And some of them have support groups, some of them have therapy, or they connect you then to other services in the community, right? Helping give that bridge to what is it that you need.
Was there something beautiful that you remember about Levi's service? Or those days that you look back on and can smile?
Yeah, so in his active dying days, we had a conversation with our hospice team because we knew that time was coming. And I would say there's 2 beautiful things. One is he had a lot of caregivers, PCAs, nurses, therapists. And on the day that we knew for sure, like he's moving into active dying. And as parents, we've opened up to accept that, right? There's a whole process and it's different for each parent. We were in our home because at that point we didn't have Crescent Cove in our community, which offers end of life, both hospice and respite services. And he didn't spend a lot of time in the hospital. He really spent 5 weeks out of 7 years in the hospital. So home was the place. So once we knew he was dying, we met with that hospice team. We had the services in place and just said, how do we make these decisions? And we decided to just tell all his caregivers and all his people, come over. You are the first to know that this is happening. We're not announcing it to the world until all of you know, his team. And they came.
Wow. And just spent time with him next to the bed and
Spend time with him next to the bed. Most of his life was spent on one level of our house. We have 2 levels, and
Okay.
he spent time in both levels. But we had decided for this hospice journey at home, and we had been with other families who had children die. So we had a kind of a lens of what this might look like at home. And I've already been an advocate in this space, so I talked to a lot of professionals. And so we decided we wanted to place him in a particular room in our home for the full dying process. So we engaged his team while they were there.
I love just him being surrounded by all the love of people and his team and his village. And that makes my heart smile because these kids come into the lives of so many people and we are forever changed.
Absolutely.
And,
And every one of us that is a part of our child's life is changed. They change a lot. Talk about change makers. These kids.
Yeah.
And what a generous gift you gave to everyone involved, because you could have just said, no, this is our private moment, but it was a gift that you gave to each practitioner and individual. My uncle just died a couple months ago, and when he was at this active stage at the very end, he was a minister at one point. They all surrounded him hours before he died, and it was this really beautiful moment for them and for him. And so I just visually see that as well with Levi. So
And I would even say, Dannell, thank you for giving us this gift of knowledge, because all I want to do is hide my head in the sand whenever someone mentions palliative hospice. And so I think giving us this insight to being like, we don't want to talk about it, but then we're aware of it to make sure that our children feel that love when and if it does happen. Thank you for sharing
You're
this.
welcome. You're welcome.
And before we end, I wanted just ask you, is this what launched you into being a palliative care advocate and family educator? Or did you have a background in social work or something in the area?
I had no
Oh, so
background in
then this-
medicine at all.
Oh, interesting.
In fact,
Okay.
I don't do medicine. This is not my world. What launched me into advocacy was that we were given what I call that golden gift of a palliative care consult very early, within the second week of his life. And we'd already been through a million things in that first week, as happened in the NICU.
Mhm.
And we got it right at the top. Palliative care was with us literally as we came home, journeyed with us. My palliative care nurse came with me to my first neurology visit. I was like, I don't know what I ask a neurologist. How do I even plan for this? So they were with us from the start. And Levi really became like a poster child for palliative care. We learned how to care for him medically. We learned how to care for him emotionally. I learned how to be an advocate. And we as parents know him best and believe that and embody that. And palliative care helped us with that. And there was a point at which, due to matrix changing in the palliative care system, which was a higher up decision. It wasn't a palliative care team. It was a higher C-suite decision. Levi didn't qualify for home-based, community-based palliative care. And in fact, we were really kicked out of palliative care because the matrix of what qualified a child like him for this changed. And then I experienced life without palliative care. And I was like, oh man, this is awful. One of those palliative care often gives is a 24-hour line. And when someone picks up that line, they're someone from that palliative care team and they know your kid. Even if they haven't met them, they've heard those updates every week. They have a starting place, right? They don't just open up the chart and go, yeah, why don't you go to ER? I'm like, but I don't want, right? That's why I'm calling a 24-hour line. I want to stay home. I'm just out of tune. I'm lost for a moment here. And we discovered what life without palliative care was like. And I started talking around to some of my mom friends and being like, so is this what it's really like for you? Do you have this? And what about that? And they're like, oh yeah, this is how we do it. And I was like, oh no. So then I was able to work with another program that was doing a pilot and get him just bare bones palliative care service, just the most minimal approach. And that was way better than nothing in our world. And so once that was back in his life, that gave me a little breathing room to say, if I can make a change for other families, to learn about palliative care, to increase access, to improve the care from the clinicians, to help non-palliative care clinicians develop palliative care skills,
Mhm.
then this is going to make things way better for the next wave of families. Because in Minnesota, we have so many amazing services because of the parents who came before us, who
Mhm.
said,
Touche.
we need waivers, we need fill in the blank, right? And I wanted to be one of those parents that helped change the landscape. And bit by bit, I just stepped into advocacy. I had a great palliative care nurse who kept saying, hey, you want to write an article? Hey, you want to be on an advocacy group? Hey, do you want to help at the legislature and give a testimony? Wherever it was, I was like, yes, please. Anything I can do to help other families.
We don't know what we don't know, right? That's why we're talking. Well, now I'm thinking, I think we need palliative care. I know we qualify. Why wouldn't I? I love that I'm opened up to this world a little bit more.
And I
Absolutely.
will let you know that depending on who you ask, you may have to ask a few times. And you may have to ask different health systems because they may say no because the provider isn't educated. They may say, oh, you don't need that. There's a phrase that's, there's nothing to palliate, right? Things are stable. So you may have to ask around different providers within different health systems until you find the yes and say, I want to set things up before it gets.
I think you make an interesting point. There's nothing to palliate. What is the definition of palliative? And this is just my own ignorance here.
I can add a resource to this. The Center to Advance Palliative Care has a really great website called Get Palliative Care. And they have a one-page info sheet in English and in Spanish about what is palliative care? How do you find it? Who's involved in palliative care? Like just the basics. Does my insurance cover it?
Yeah, we'll edit.
Perfect. The show notes. So, Dannell, thank you for giving us this high level. I know we could go on and you could fill us in for more information about both topics. And actually, we would love to have you back on for a multi-series about your experience in this world and other topics within grief and all the other topics that you have taught me about. So we're definitely going to add you in. Dannell also does great work in advocacy and she does different programming. And so we'd love for you to check out her redbirdtime.com to find out more information about Dannell and all of her work that she is doing in this space. So thank you so much for giving us this gift of information about these two topics, because I think we three didn't know. And I think the listeners are going to love having this information because it is intimidating in that clinical setting to talk about this because we just want to not worry about these things. But I think it's a nice to know so when we're ready for it.
Yes, thank you so much. So helpful to hear all of this.
Thank you, Dannell. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
If you liked today's topic or have comments, questions, or thoughts on what else you would like us to cover, please visit rarelyfamiliar.com or connect with us on all the social channels. Resources will be listed in our show notes, and we'll be back next time with another discussion around living life successfully with rare medical complexities. Thanks for joining us on the journey.